Hello again, and this is my video lecture on entity clusters. So, as you've seen, even with the Pine Valley furniture company entity relationship diagram, it gets pretty complicated. It gets difficult to read, and as you can imagine, there are some instances where these entity relationship diagrams have hundreds or thousands of entities and relationships, and they get very, very difficult to read after a while. And now that we're talking about the extended entity relationship diagram, the EER, you can imagine that these diagrams become very, very difficult to read. So kind of going back to an earlier topic of, the entity view versus the project view of things, where the enterprise view is kind of a higher level, and then when you get down to the project level, it's much more specific and detailed. This is basically what entity clustering does. So what we basically do is we take sections of the extended entity relationship diagram, or even simple, not even extended, just entity diagrams, in order to make them more simple to look at. We cluster some of the entities. So let's take a look at what I'm talking about. If we look at our slide 25, you can see that this is a fairly complicated, this is the Pine Valley Furniture entity diagram from Microsoft Visio. So what we want to do is, instead of leaving this like this, maybe there are entities we can cluster together. So for instance, if you look at salesperson and sales territory, we can cluster that together and say that this is a selling unit. Then we can cluster customer and the regular cluster and the national customer, and just make that one entity called customer. And then we have, you get the idea. I'm not going to go crazy with this. So what happens is we take this fairly complicated entity relationship diagram, and what the result is this, which is much, much more readable. The trick is to make sure that the relationships are consistent. So, the selling unit has entities within it. We have to make sure that when we simplify and cluster our entities, that the relationships are still consistent when we move from the non-clustered to the clustered diagram. And here is just another example of a manufacturing entity cluster. We have work center, works in, employee, and again we have management employee. So this is when you go back and you look at your manufacturing, which is down here at the bottom, which is the last. What we can do is, if someone's interested in manufacturing, we can go and we can look at the manufacturing entity cluster and break that back out into its detail. So this would be someone at the project level. This is someone looking at it from the enterprise level. And that ends the lecture on entity clusters, or entity clustering.